Well, thank you to everyone who's joined and logged on to this webinar, hosted jointly by DeVono Cresa, a leading commercial real estate consultancy acting on behalf of occupiers, and also BDB Pitmans, a leading law firm with offices in London, Reading, Southampton and Cambridge. And over the next sort of 45 minutes or an hour or so, we'll be looking to discuss some sort of themed topics with regard to how should businesses effectively adapt, adopt and improve their office workspace post-COVID. Just by way of a bit of introduction, I myself am a director, Ben Ashby speaking, a director here in the DeVono Cresa, the office agency and consultancy team. I'm joined by Chris Lewis, who heads up that team within DeVono Cresa. And then from the BDB Pitmans side, I'm joined by Jonathan Fuster, head of their real estate department, Emma Roche, one of their legal directors, and then also Brian Gegg, a partner in the employment team and head of their business advisory department. We're kind of running on sort of two themes here, one of which being the sort of physical real estate side of the workplace, the actual bricks and mortar and the office space itself and the market, but then also from a legal perspective, where occupiers are positioned on a sort of liability perspective as well. So we'll be running that sort of dual themed approach throughout.
I think on the bigger end, so the corporate end of the market, there was already pre-COVID an emerging kind of core and flex model that people were talking about, and I think that probably is something that will remain. Going back to my earlier point about cash preservation, the problem is the more flexibility you bake into a deal, the less cash there is available from the landlord to help fund certain aspects. So if you're facing a big move with big capex requirements, then the way to leverage, your landlord the most to get as much cash out as possible to help you fund that move and the fit out and all the rest of it is to give them a decent lease term. So the less term you give, the bigger the impact there. So I think that's probably a consideration. Whether we see the core and flex model moving down into that smaller market, I'm not sure at the moment. I think the reality is we're going to have so much choice in terms of that flexible space I was talking about earlier, the landlords are giving, as well as subleases coming onto the market from tenants who are looking to kind of downsize their footprint, as well as the flexible operators who, again, are also tilting their models slightly to offer different products. It's probably never been, and it won't be for quite some time, I should think. These next 12 months will probably be some of the best times to be out acquiring and looking for office space, but also one of the biggest moments to make a call that you need office space. Recognise that too.
Yeah, I think it's twofold, isn't it? I think in terms of how the business operates, and also sort of the psychology and the mental health element to that. I think that's going to be a huge play in the next 6 months as well, actually. And obviously, in the government guidance at the moment is that you come into work if you can't work at home, and one of those reasons, or a large sway of people that I know are working in the office is because they work effectively in the office because they want that interaction and they want a different space from home. So I think that's a big play. And just working as a team and working and supervising with trainees. So if you're a supervisor to a trainee, you're in the office at the moment. So there's a play both ways. But in terms of the office, there won't be a death of the office. It is just going to be, it's just going to have that flexibility, isn't it? In terms of, some of the Magic Circle firms are saying that their employees can work up to 50% at home, and that's going to look like a permanent solution. But I don't think it will be any more than that. So I think it's pros and cons, isn't it? I think people have realised they've got that balance, that work-life balance that they can have by having that time at home. But I think people are also desperate to get back into the office. So it's not going to be one way or the other.
To be honest with you, I'm probably perhaps blindly optimistic. about the future. I think that at the moment we are in a moment in time, and to kind of continue Emma's analogy or comment, you know, the last point to decide you're going to give up drink is in the middle of a hangover, and we're kind of in that position at the moment with offices and the whole impact of the virus. I think that the reality is, you know, what we've seen is technology has been able to keep businesses going and keep them going very well because it's had to. I think if all else was equal and people had the choice, genuine choice about being able to get safely into the office and work in the office with colleagues, would people rather be there? I think on the whole, most people would rather be there to some extent. I don't think any of us really think it's ever going to move back to 100% in the office, but the reality is it never was. There were probably only a handful of businesses that weren't already offering or operating on some form of agile basis. So it's not kind of new news. The real headlines are for those businesses who previously didn't accept it as a way of working, who've had to and seen it does work, and that's probably where you've had the eureka moment and the biggest impact. So I think that, you know, as you say, once things become a bit calmer and there is a way through this, people will start to return to the office. But it's going to take a long time. It's going to take a long time for any kind of normality and stability to return to the market, which is good for our clients, good for occupiers generally, and also good for landlords. So, you know, 2021 probably through to beginning part of 22 will be pretty good times for tenants. I think off the back of what was already a pretty low supply of space. So the real bulk of supply that will be coming through will be tenant-driven supply as opposed to landlord-driven supply. And of course, tenant-driven supply is always about mitigation rather than about setting valuation-linked rents. So yeah, it should be good times. I mean, interestingly, there's a whole piece about, you know, at the moment, people are working from home in many cases because they have to. It's not necessarily a contractual requirement. Moving forward, you could imagine a situation where people have seen this silver bullet of space reduction and actually bake it into people's contracts that an element of their time is expected to be at home. And then presumably, you know, as much as we don't like the idea of it on our side, there's actually a huge issue there for the companies as well, because, you know, unwittingly, they've suddenly, you know, a company of 300 people have suddenly got a footprint of 301 offices because they've got that responsibility for other people's home environment.
Well, absolutely. And I think, you know, I personally haven't seen a client change people's workplace yet. They're still operating on the contracts they've always operated on. And probably in health and safety terms, people are working temporarily at home at the moment. When you get to permanently working at home, you've got a whole different ballgame, because the health and safety flips into having to monitor that workplace, which is the home, making sure that workplace is safe, etc., and do a risk assessment for that workplace. People are not quite seeing that coming yet. There's some care to be taken there.
I think the one thing I'll add, Ben, is that there's the common thread in all of this ought to be culture. And for ages now, people have spoken about, regardless of the sector, about the culture of their business and what they're trying to represent. And I think that, again, a bit like that whole issue of how do you deal with having 300 remote workers, managing those people, actually at a culture level, how do you retain the culture that you've spent so long building if you're actually never together as a group? And that's hard enough when we've all been working together for the last 5 years. When you've got new people joining your business and actually it takes them 6 months before they physically meet anybody, it's really hard for them to genuinely feel that they're a part of the team, however good your platform is for doing that. And similarly, that flows through, as Emma was saying earlier, to the younger guys who do benefit from observing what their seniors are doing and the work that's going on, and just the chat around the office. So I think there's an awful lot that's actually not sector specific. There's much softer, but frankly really, really important, and what sets one business apart from another.
Yeah.
I think that's right, Chris. But I think, again, it goes back, culture, landlords, that understanding of tenants' needs, because I think there's always going to be a need to have that office environment. It's just that people may not need as much of it for a fixed time, or they need to be able to, co-occupy with other people or work collaboratively with other businesses. And I think from a landlord and tenant point of view, where we usually are, we already established that the Coronavirus Act was a bit of a political sop, really. It didn't really do much to address that relationship, other than say, as a landlord, you can't forfeit, which is probably the last thing you'd do anyway. You want the tenant in there. They are the people that pay your rent. And it didn't really offer any real guidance as to dealings between landlord and tenants. And I think, a lease is a rule book, effectively. And we've got many fixed rules in there that we're going to have to get landlords to look at. An obvious one is around, occupation, your ability to sort of mitigate if you don't need all of your space, being a bit more free about underlettings of part or co-sharing on licenses. It was always the fear of landlords that was bad because it could be a management issue. You get somebody in, they may claim rights, but I think people just are going to have to grow up a little bit about that, because the way we're operating, we have people segregated anyway in spaces. What is a permitted part that can be exclusively occupied now? It's probably quite different to what it was before. And people are desperate to mitigate liability for space that they can't use, and other people, I guess, will enter the market if there's a more flexible entry point. So I think I expect us to see changes in what has always been, sacrosanct clauses in leases about landlords just having to accept that flexibility and passing it down.
I just, in terms of closing up, it's obviously very topical at the moment for all of us. We're all in this together, which I suppose gives us all some sort of sense of camaraderie, and so we're all feeling the pain to some extent. But it's certainly an interesting viewpoints that you've all been giving us today on these topics of returning to the office and the sort of culture change that's needed between landlord and tenant and what's happening to the market. Very insightful. So thank you very much indeed.